Well, good evening, mates. It's been a few days since I've read. When last we saw Jim Hawkins, he was running away from Long John Silver and the other pirates, and as he's running, he meets a strange man whom it turns out has been marooned on this island. That's Ben Gunn. They hear the sound of gunfire and they run towards the anchorage, that is the place where the ship has been anchored and where the small boats have brought them ashore. In the next chapter, we're going to find out what happens next, of course. The narrative is going to be continued by the doctor, and it's called How the Ship Was Abandoned. It was about 1:30, 3 bells in the sea phrase. Now, time, when they told time on the ship, they told it by means of bells. Every 4 hours was a different watch. The 24-hour day was divided into 6 watches of 4 hours each. Every sailor would work for 4 hours and be off for 4 hours. Then he'd work for 4 hours and be off for 4 hours. Well, they didn't have clocks and they didn't have watches. What they did have was an hourglass, a sand glass. You might have seen one, an egg timer. And there would be someone who would turn the egg timer every time it ran out, and it would run for 1/2 hour. And every half hour, they would ring the time by clanging a bell, so that, for instance, at 12 o'clock, that would be 8 bells. 12:30 would be 1 bell. 1 o'clock, 2 bells. 1:30, 3 bells, and so on. At the end of 4 hours, they would ring 8 bells and start over again. So it was 1:30, 3 bells in the sea phrase, that the 2 boats went ashore from the Hispaniola. Now we've gone back a little bit in time. We're back to when Jim has just gone ashore. So this is a little bit of a recapitulation of what had gone before. The captain, the squire, and I were talking matters over in the cabin. Now this is, when he says the squire and I, the captain is Captain Smollett, the squire is Squire Trelawney, and I is Dr. Livesey. The captain, the squire, and I were talking matters over in the cabin. Had there been a breath of wind, we should have fallen on the 6 mutineers who were left aboard with us, slipped our cable, and away to sea. They would have left the anchor there. Slipped their cable means they would leave the anchor where it was and they'd just go off. But the wind was wanting. There was no wind. And to complete our helplessness, down came Hunter with the news that Jim Hawkins had slipped into a boat and was gone ashore with the rest. It never occurred to us to doubt Jim Hawkins, but we were alarmed for his safety. With the men and the temper they were in, it seemed an even chance if we should see the lad again. We ran on deck. The pitch was bubbling in the seams. The nasty stench of the place turned me sick. If ever man smelt fever and dysentery, it was in that abominable anchorage. There in the deep tropics, it's damp, it's humid, there are mosquitoes. When he says fever and dysentery, he's talking about malaria, yellow fever, or other tropical diseases. The pitch is the tar that they use to waterproof the ship, and the seams are the seams of the wood planks on the deck. The 6 scoundrels were sitting grumbling under a sail in the forecastle. Ashore, we could see the gigs made fast. Now, a gig is a small, light boat, like a rowboat, rowed by oars, and a man sitting in each hard by where the river runs in. One of them was whistling Lily Bolero. Now, just in case you've never heard Lily Bolero, here it is.
lero, lily bolero, bullanala. Lero, 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 lily bolero, bullanala. Over my soul it is a towboat, lily bolero, bullanala, and he will come.
That's Lily Bolero, a Scotch, an Irish song. Waiting was a strain, and it was decided that Hunter and I should go ashore with the jolly boat in quest of information. Now, every ship had a number of boats on it because they needed boats to be able to go ashore, to be able to do work around the ship. So the jolly boat is a boat that was rowed by 4 to 6 oars, 2 or 3 on either side, and it was a moderately large rowboat. We would go ashore with the jolly boat in quest of information. The gigs had leaned to their right, meaning they'd gone off to the right, but Hunter and I pulled straight in the direction of the stockade upon the chart. Now, if we look closely at the chart, we would see that there was a stockade, and he'll describe a stockade in a moment. The two who were left guarding their boat seemed in a bustle at our appearance. Lily Bolero stopped off, and I could see the pair discussing what they ought to do. Had they gone and told Silver, all might have turned out differently. But they had their orders, I suppose, and decided to sit quietly where they were and hark back again to Lily Bolero. There was a slight bend in the coast, and I steered so as to put it between us, that is to say, between the Dr. Livesey and the other men and the other boats, the pirates. Even before we had landed, we thus lost sight of the gigs. I jumped out and came as near running as I durst, with a big silk handkerchief under my hat for coolness' sake, and a brace of pistols ready primed for safety. I'd not gone 100 yards when I came on the stockade. This was how it was. A spring of clear water rose almost at the top of a knoll, a little hill. Well, on the knoll and enclosing the spring, they had clapped a stout log house, fit to hold 20 people on a pinch, that's 40 people, and loopholed for musketry on every side. It was, in short, a fortress. All round this they had cleared a wide space, and then the thing was completed by a paling 6 feet high without door or opening. So they had a fence made out of wooden poles stuck into the ground, and but not a solid wall, so that they could see what was going on the other side of this paling. It was too strong to pull down without time and labor, and too open to shelter the besiegers. They didn't want they didn't want anyone who was attacking them to be able to hide behind this wall. The people in the log house had them in every way. They stood quiet in shelter and shot the others like partridges. All they wanted was a good watch and food, for short of a complete surprise, they might have held the place against a regiment. What particularly took my fancy was the spring. For though we had a good enough place of it in the cabin of the Hispaniola, with plenty of arms and ammunition and things to eat and excellent wines, there had been one thing overlooked. We had no water. I was thinking this over when there came ringing over the island the cry of a man at the point of death. I was not new to violent death. I've served His Royal Highness the Duke of Cumberland, and got a wound myself at Fontenoy. But I know my pulse went dot and carry one, meaning his pulse stopped for a second, his heart stopped for a second, and then beat faster. Jim Hawkins is gone, was my first thought. Now, you'll remember Jim Hawkins heard this same thing in 2 chapters ago. He heard the pirates killing one of the crewmen who would not join them. It is something to have been an old soldier, but more still to have been a doctor. There's no time to dilly-dally in our work. And so now I made up my mind instantly, and with no time lost returned to the shore and jumped on board the jolly boat. By good fortune, Hunter pulled a good oar. We made the water fly, and the boat was soon alongside, and I aboard the schooner. I found them all shaken, as was natural. They had heard the same sound. The squire was sitting down as white as a sheet, thinking of the harm he had led us to, the good soul. And one of the 6 forecastle hands was little better. Those were the 6 sailors who were suspected of mutiny. "There's a man," says Captain Smollett, nodding towards him, "new to this work. He came nigh hand fainting, doctor, when he heard the cry." Another touch of the rudder, and that man would join us. I told my plan to the captain, and between us we settled on the details of its accomplishment. And here's the plan. We put old Redruth in the gallery between the cabin and the forecastle, with 3 or 4 loaded muskets and a mattress for protection. Redruth, one of the squire's servants, is going to protect them from the other 6 mutineers. Hunter brought the boat round under the stern port, under the back of the boat, and Joyce and I set to work loading her with powder tins, muskets, bags of biscuits, kegs of pork, a cask of cognac, and my invaluable medicine chest. He was the doctor. In the meantime, the squire and the captain stayed on deck, and the latter hailed the coxswain, the steersman, who was the principal man on board. "Mr. Hans," he said, "here are 2 of us with a brace of pistols each. If any one of you 6 make a signal of any description, that man's dead." They were a good deal taken aback. Don't forget, they had no pistols, they had no arms, they had no swords. They just had themselves. And after a little consultation, one and all tumbled down the fore companion, thinking, no doubt, to take us on the rear. They thought they would go below decks, come around from behind, and come up behind them. But when they saw Redruth waiting for them in the sparred gallery, they went about at once, and a head popped out again on deck. "Down, dog!" cries the captain. And the head popped back again, and we heard no more, for a time, of these 6 very faint-hearted seamen. By this time, tumbling in things as they came, we had the jolly boat loaded as much as we dared. If they put too much in it, it'd sink. Joyce and I got through the stern port, and we made for shore again as fast as oars could take us. This second trip fairly aroused the watchers along shore. Lillibullero was dropped again. They stopped singing, and just before we lost sight of them behind the little point, one of them whipped ashore and disappeared. I had half a mind to change my plan and destroy their boats, but I feared that Silver and the others might be close at hand, and all might very well be lost by trying for too much. We had soon touched land in the same place as before and set to provision the blockhouse. That's the stockade they've been talking about. All 3 made the first journey, heavily laden, and tossed our stores over the palisade. Then, leaving Joyce in the stockade to guard them, 1 man to be sure, but with 6 muskets, Hunter and I returned to the jolly boat and loaded ourselves once more. So we proceeded without pausing to take breath till the whole cargo was bestowed. when the two servants took up their position in the blockhouse, and I, with all my power, sculled back to the Hispaniola. They'd been working very hard. That we should have risked a second boatload seems more daring than it really was. They had the advantage of numbers, of course, but we had the advantage of arms. We had the guns. Not one of the men ashore had a musket, and before they could get within range for pistol shooting, we flattered ourselves we should be able to give a good account of a half a dozen at least. A pistol won't shoot as accurately as far as a rifle or a musket. A musket was like a rifle, a long gun. The squire was waiting for me at the stern window. That's what he'd been calling the stern port before. All his faintness gone from him. He caught the painter, that's the rope at the bow of the jolly boat, and made it fast. He tied the jolly boat to the schooner, to the ship, and we fell to loading the boat for our very lives. Pork, powder, and biscuit was the cargo, with only a musket and a cutlass apiece for Squire and me and Redruth and the captain. The rest of the arms and powder we dropped overboard in 2.5 fathoms of water. That's about 15 feet of water. That's quite a ways down, so that we could see the bright steel shining far below us in the sun on the clean, sandy bottom. By this time, the tide was beginning to ebb. Now, twice a day, the tide comes in, and the level of the sea rises up on the shore, and twice a day the tide goes out, and you can see more and more of the beach. You've probably seen that in the coast on the Mediterranean when you go to the beach. And the ship was swinging round to her anchor, so when the tide went out, there was a current, and the ship would be drawn off in one direction. Voices were heard faintly hallooing in the direction of the two gigs, meaning back on shore from the pirates, and though this reassured us for Joyce and Hunter, who were well to the eastward in the stockade, it warned our party to be off. Redruth retreated from his place in the gallery and dropped into the boat, which we then brought round to the ship's counter to be handier for Captain Smollett, a place a little easier to get into than a place that you had to hang out a window and drop down. "Now, men," said he, "do you hear me?" There was no answer from the forecastle. "It's to you, Abraham Gray. It's to you I'm speaking." Still no reply. "Gray," resumed Mr. Smollett a little louder, "I am leaving this ship, and I order you to follow your captain. I know you're a good man at bottom, and I dare say not one of the lot of you's as bad as he makes out. I have my watch here in my hand. I give you 30 seconds to join me in." There was a pause. "Come, my fine fellow," continued the captain, "don't hang so long in stays. I'm risking my life and the lives of these good gentlemen every second." There was a sudden scuffle, a sound of blows, and out burst Abraham Gray with a knife cut on the side of his cheek. And he came running to the captain like a dog to the whistle. "I'm with you, sir," said he. And the next moment he and the captain had dropped aboard of us, and we had shoved off and given way. We were clear out of the ship, but not yet ashore in our stockade. That's chapter 16. We'll pick it up at another time.